or policies that may need to be reviewed and revised. The other option was to do a housing action plan, which the City of Oak Harbor chose to go with. We received a grant from Commerce, and we brought on board the consulting firm of LDC. Todd Hall is the planning manager with LDC. Matt Covert, I think, is also working with you, Todd. Mm-hmm. Also working with me as project manager is Kat Kamak. He's the interim development services director for the city, plus other planning staff that we have working on some other aspects of the plan as well. So again, welcome to you all. What I'd like to do is go around the screen, as it were, and have you introduce yourself and basically who you represent, who you are with, how long you've been with the city or working in the city of Oak Harbor, and then also what are you actually looking forward to getting through this process? What are your expectations of sitting on the stakeholders group? So with that, I don't know how you want to proceed, Todd. I've got a list of names, but we want to start.
Yeah, I can go ahead and just introduce myself, and then we can just go around the room. Again, my name is Todd Hall. I'm the planning manager with LDC. We're located in Woodinville, and we currently assist the city with a housing action plan, and we've regularly worked on a number of projects up in Island County and in and around Oak Harbor as well. We've been in existence for about 17 years. Our main headquarters here is in Woodinville, and we have another satellite office in Kent, Washington. And our group, we have about 5 or so, 6 people in the planning division, and we also have a large surveying group, civil engineering and structural at our office. But we're super excited to help out Dennis and CAC and the whole city of Oak Harbor on this really exciting project. We interviewed for the position, and we were just thrilled to get to know Dennis and CAC, and we're looking forward to working with everybody at the city. So today is really meant to be a kind of introduction to the project, to the process, what we're going to go through, and then kind of towards the end, we'll leave an open discussion with a few questions to go around. So with that, kind of open the floor and introduce yourselves. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Oren Kalatis, and I work for Habitat for Humanity of Island County. I worked for Habitat for almost going on 6 years. Prior to that, I had a general contracting business here in Oak Harbor. I moved back about a little over 16 years ago. So definitely being able to see the housing from both sides, from the private sector and for the probably the most vulnerable here in Island County. So I'm very passionate about housing in general, and hoping that we can find a way for, for some more access, I guess, for some of our lower income families to be able to get into the market and be able to earn some wealth and hopefully give something back to the community. And yeah, I'm glad to be here and be a part of it.
Thank you, Oren. Amy?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi guys, I'm Amy. I'm a real estate agent with Coldwell Banker, now 360 team. You might still know us by our old name, Coldwell Banker Coochie, down on Pioneer. I've lived in Oak Harbor now 11 years. I can't believe it. I'm a Midwest transplant, but I'm starting to hang out here for a long time. And been in real estate 4 years now. And I think the main ambition is really, everybody kind of points the finger at us realtors, assuming that we're so thrilled that we're making so much money off of these high housing prices. But in reality, it is a difficult world when you have 5 buyers who are all competing over the same house, and they don't have any more room to go up in their budget. And it really is a barrier to entry. The imbalance in the market for Whidbey Island. So that's why, and being on the somewhat younger side, you know, it's my friends who are trying to own their first house and just feel like it's a complete impossibility. So that's where I'm really passionate of. I see it with my friends and my clients every day. So anything that I can do to help grease the wheels of trying to figure out ways to get it more balanced is definitely something I'm interested. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Amy. Wayne, I see you next on my screen. How are you doing? Wayne?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Wayne Kreider. I'm the Executive Director for the Skagit Island Counties Builders Association. I've actually lived in Oak Harbor for about 33 years. I've been with the Builders Association for 23. And I have watched difference in housing and the struggles and everything over the years in housing for just about all income brackets. So I'm looking forward to working on something that we can maybe come up with a way to meet the needs of most of those brackets, if not from owning, but at least from being able to find a place to rent.
All right, thank you, Wayne. I've got Sammy Adams on my screen, but she's part of your team, Todd, right?
Yeah, she can just say a quick hello. She's our note taker today. She's one of our permit technicians.
Hello. Nice to see you all.
Thank you, Sammy.
Darren, I see you next up on my screen.
There we go. You guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm Darren Hughesby of Hughesby Homes, and I've been part of the Oak Harbor community since about 2007. I worked for Seattle Pacific Homes when we were building up there. I've recently started my own company about 4 years ago, and I'm making my way back to Oak Harbor. Family's got roots in Oak Harbor. My dad's actually a graduate of Oak Harbor High School, and obviously joined the Navy, did that whole deal. But I'm hoping to, I'm hoping to remove some barriers. As a home builder, obviously I'm on the front lines for bringing housing to the table, and there's a lot of barriers to keep the costs down, and they just keep getting more and more onerous. So I'd love to be able to help, and hopefully, like Amy said, grease the wheels a little bit. Hopefully to kind of speed the process up, and hopefully bring more affordable housing to the town. As housing is it's very short there in town.
All right, very good. Thank you, Darren. Colin, how are you? Oop. I don't hear Colin.
Yeah, can't hear you, Colin.
Check. How about now?
Anything? There you go.
Good.
Yes.
There we go. Yeah, I'm the young guy and can't figure out my computer. So apologies for being late and working with Darren on a development here in town. I think I've been back here since 2015. Worked with Dennis on an annexation of a piece of land, and I think Darren hit it too. I'm kind of on the same wavelength on removing some of the barriers and potentially adding some incentives to developers to get some lower end affordable housing going. So I think that's about all I got, but glad to meet everybody and sorry for being late.
All right, thank you, Colin. Jessica, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite. I'm Jessica Carpenter. I am the Island County Planning and Community Development Director. I have been with Island County for 6 months. So I have a personal investment in this as well as a very large scope investment in this endeavor. I have yet to move up to Island County strictly for the issue of lack of inventory. I currently live in South Seattle and I commute. And it has been a real struggle to try to jump on. And like Amy was saying, there was one home in particular that I wanted really bad and was willing to opt into the bidding, and I lost. So you can only go so high, and it's not worth it to put yourself into the rears with that bidding process. There's a lot of people with a lot of money in this area. So, you know, unfortunately, it's really put me in a bind. I love my position here in Island County. I came from headquarters at WashDOT. I have been in land use development practice on the public service sector side for about 17, 18 years. I was in transportation for a few years. I've done environmental at EPA. I've worked in Spokane County for 5 years earlier in my career, but housing is huge nowadays. That is the missing middle factor for housing is so integral. Island County as a whole, we need to look at this. So as far as being a part of this organization, I think it's great because I'm already working from an economic development perspective in more than one capacity with Oak Harbor. And this is a huge topic for both Island County and Oak Harbor, and the collaboration between us has been wonderful, tremendous, and growing exponentially in my short time here in Island County. So I'm looking forward to this.
Great, thank you. I'll kind of take over here now, Dennis, and thank you everybody again for participating in this.
Thank you.
In this project, and I can, just as a side note, I can really relate with Jessica and Amy on the home buying. Myself, we just moved into a larger home in the Woodinville area, and I know exactly what everybody's going through because we were outbid a couple of times and we finally hit the jackpot and got a house. So it's interesting to see that you're definitely have the same challenges. Everybody knows we have the challenges over here in King and Snohomish counties, but to find out that it's not any easier over there in Island County, that pretty much says that there's a crisis going on in all of Western Washington, if not the entire state. So yeah, thanks for those anecdotal comments too. So through the project here, I'll just go briefly through the agenda. And you should have received from Dennis about a week or so ago a packet of about 4 materials, which included an agenda, which kind of summarizes what we're going over today, basic committee roles and responsibilities form, some action plan background information, and then lastly is kind of the cheat sheet just for how to use GoToMeeting if you've never used virtual stuff. I know a lot of us are really getting schooled now in this, and so if at any time you need to turn off your screen and go take a break or whatever, feel free. You're not going to offend me or Dennis. We totally get it. I'm planning on taking a break here in about an hour, probably less than that. Just kind of depends on how we go, but we'll get through the PowerPoint presentation. And then before we get into the group discussion, which we've got, again, about 3 questions, and that'll just lead us into, I'm sure, an organic discussion, but we'll take a little break just so everybody can stretch their legs and do what they need to do. And so here's the agenda again. The overview of the Housing Action Plan, purpose, goals, and objectives. We'll talk a little bit about the project schedule, what your roles are as a stakeholder committee member. Some of you may have been involved in a planning activity or something similar to this in the past, but you know, generally speaking, you're providing the city important guidance and feedback as part of this very important project. And then again, we'll have a group discussion after the break, and then we'll just close and talk about next steps and when we'll meet again. So just really briefly on the meeting guidelines. These are generally for kind of larger meetings, but I just like to go over it. It's just kind of basic information. So as a facilitator, and my role primarily as serving the city itself, we'll make sure that we always begin and end on time. We really respect your guys' time and appreciate the volunteer time that you're giving to us as part of this project, and so does Dennis and CAC. So we'll if we do need to extend the meeting for whatever reason, and I don't anticipate that, but if we have a great conversation going and we want to continue that, by all means we can. We just want to make sure that the group is comfortable with that. And then we'll ensure that everybody has a chance to speak. Today it looks like we have a relatively small group. I know a lot of people are on vacation right now, so we totally get that. July, August is just get out of town months. So especially nowadays with whatever's going on, anybody's just trying to get out and do something away from the crowd. So we understand that. So, and then in terms of your membership or SAC members, we just ask that you bring creativity, ideas, and just be willing to learn. We know that everybody has varying viewpoints about housing in general or planning. So we just ask that you listen courteously and respect everybody's opinions on that, no matter kind of what background you're from. This is really to just gather all kinds of information, and the city's going to take note as well as we will, and then move that forward into the next phases of the project. So this is really just an opportunity to kind of open discussion, talk freely about it, and just share your opinions. I just do want to make for the record, you might see the record sign up there now. I am recording the meeting, so that's why I say if you do need to get up and walk away, you can certainly turn off your screen. But I just wanted to make that for the record. We're going to provide this as part of the public record on the project website, and I'll show you as part of the screen where that's going to live on the city's webpage. So we'll kind of get started with the meat of the discussion today. And the first part is, what is the actual purpose of the Housing Action Plan? So why are we here? Well, Dennis briefly gave a 2-minute discussion about it, but the big reason really is we're currently in a regional housing crisis, if not a statewide housing crisis. We all know from your stories, as well as what we're reading in the news, to just hearing from Windermere or any of the realtors that give reports, that there truly is this challenge in affordable housing. And when I say affordable, I'm not meaning the traditional sense of affordable housing, but just housing in general, like the affordability of it, and how can we address that in terms of the working class and those folks in middle class and anybody who really is trying to get into a starter home, in fact. So this really is the bulk of the issue. So in 2019, if you follow state legislature, the state passed what's called House Bill 1923, and that's a grant program that would focus on increasing residential building capacity. And with that, it gave a bunch of tools for cities and counties to use. And one of those is developing a housing action plan, which is what the city of Oak Harbor has decided to do. And a number of other cities and counties throughout the state are currently embarking on as well. So Oak Harbor is not alone in this process. There's literally dozens of communities that are getting involved in this type of a project. And we're fortunate to help out Oak Harbor. There was $5 million worth of grants that were allocated out, and the city of Oak Harbor received an $80,000 grant from the Department of Commerce to create a housing needs assessment and a housing action plan, which is going to go towards addressing the housing issues that are affecting your area and Island County. And then this initiative fits into the broader context of the Growth Management Act and the comprehensive planning. And I'll go over a little bit of that and some slides to come. Just to give you a background, most people are at least generally aware of what GMA stands for, but I like to just do a real super high level primer. And then the city and consultant team will emphasize public and stakeholder engagement throughout the process. So this is just one facet of public engagement, but it's a very important one. We wanted to have a very strong cross-section of the community from all sectors, whether that's the home development community to the home affordability like habitat, and also city representation, as well as the city's partners with Island County. So this is just a very key group of people that Dennis and CAC hand selected and felt that you guys would really represent this project well. And in turn, we're hoping to get really good feedback so that we can give some guidance as the city moves forward with providing for addressing the housing needs. So just to kind of go over the growth management overview, back in the 1980s, late 70s and early 80s and throughout, the cities and counties were just lacking any kind of tools that were available to control growth. And back then, growth was just growing tenfold, probably even more. I remember as a kid coming to the Seattle area and back in the 80s and just seeing how beautiful it was, and I'm like, wow, I'm just surprised that there wasn't as many people even back then, but it was growing really rapidly, and a lot of Californians and Oregon folks were coming back up here. And I know that today it's even more so with the highly diverse workforce that we have here in Western Washington, not just the Seattle area, but throughout Western Washington. And they're just really, back in the 80s, though, specifically, there really wasn't a good set of tools to address the growth issues. So in 1990, the Growth Management Act was adopted, and this requires fast-growing cities and counties to develop comp plans and manage growth. And there's 13 goals that act as the basis for all comp plans, including the last one, which is shoreline management, which regulates all of the shorelines of the state. So the GMA goals are listed here. They range from your standard urban growth issues to economic development, which is very relevant to land use. It ties very well to the natural resources, to open spaces and recreation, and then of course public participation and facilities like transportation, utilities, and those things related to the expansion and growth of those. So this is just a snapshot really of kind of what GMA is about, how it fits into the overall state program. And this is just a map that shows the 18 counties that were required to plan fully for GMA. Those are the ones that are in green, which includes Island County. 10 counties have decided to opt in to plan fully, although they weren't required to. And then there's 11 counties that currently don't plan under the GMA. This slide just represents kind of how this all fits together with housing. So you have the overall housing goals as part of the GMA, and then that ties into the countywide planning policy requirements. So Jessica's group at Island County, they have their own set of policies that dictate and kind of guide housing issues as part of the county as a whole, and so do all the other counties in the state that planned under the GMA. And with that, there's a comprehensive plan for the individual communities, including Oak Harbor, that a housing element is required, which basically talks about the inventory and goals and policies, identifies land, so there's like a buildable lands analysis, and talks about various types of housing, whether that's low income or manufactured or multifamily, and then finally making provisions that meets the needs of all economic segments of the community. And that's probably one of the bigger factors that we're talking about here today, but all of these really play a big role in the overall agenda of the Housing Action Plan as we're moving forward. So to move along in the actual Housing Action Plan itself, the purpose of this, we first have what's called the Housing Needs Assessment on the left-hand side, and that's really the kind of the data and the numbers projections, or not projections, but actually what we get from the census and what the numbers tell us from census, state data, county data, whatever we can get our hands on that really quantifies what the existing conditions are in Oak Harbor. And so we can really see where those needs are, what income levels are, documents the characteristics of housing, the age stock of what's happening in the community, what the condition of cost burden households there are. Every community has some level of cost burden happening. I worked at the city of Linwood for 7 years, and that community is extremely diverse, although there are a lot of seniors who have lived there a long time, and they've decided to keep their housing and kind of remain in place. They're on a fixed income, of course, and so that community itself had a pretty significant sector of cost burden households because of that, among other things. But that's just one example of all the communities in Western Washington and throughout the state are having some crisis with regarding to affordability. And we'll also analyze population trends, kind of look what's happened over the last 5-10 years and see what's really happening in Oak Harbor. And then we evaluate the potential for success in achieving different housing types and units. And I know Jessica or Amy mentioned missing middle type of housing, and that's just one example of kind of the sector that there's really probably one of the most needed, because we have a lot of high-end type housing, and then we also have a lot of lower end type housing. We're not necessarily lower end, but they're just more affordable in the fact that they're aging stock of housing, maybe more in disrepair, and there's just not a lot of that townhome condos development like there used to be back in the 1980s and 90s for various reasons, whether that's land costs or there's I know there was a lot of lawsuits and things that were happening over the last decade that led to the restrictions or reduction of condos. And I'll kind of let our builder friends that are on the call here kind of talk about that a little bit later. Then with regards to the Housing Action Plan, this is where we're actually going to be considering strategies to minimize the displacement of low-income residents. We'll talk about strategies to increase the supply and the variety of housing. So again, what are the types that are in most demand for Oak Harbor and the surrounding community, but specifically for this project within the city limits. And then we'll include a schedule of programs and actions that will hopefully help implement the recommendations of the Housing Action Plan. So getting back to the state law, just wanted to have a slide here to compare what it says in the overall state law versus the Housing Action Plan. And the state law requirements on the left says that you're required to do an inventory of analysis of existing and projected housing needs that identifies the number of housing units that are necessary to manage and protect or projected growth. And then also requires adequate provisions for existing and projected needs of all economic segments of the community. So the Housing Action Plan ties into this by quantifying existing and projected housing needs for all income levels with documentation of housing and household characteristics and the cost burden households. And then again, like I mentioned earlier, we're also analyzing the population and employment trends within that community. And then one additional slide, we're identifying the sufficient land for housing, including government-assisted housing, low-income family housing, manufactured housing, group homes, foster care facilities. And then it's also looking for policies that consider the need for the affordable housing, such as the housing for all economic segments of the population. And then a housing action plan, we consider strategies to minimize the displacement of low-income residents resulting from development. And then finally, our goal is to develop strategies that will hopefully increase housing supply and the variety of housing types that will be available in the city. So the next part here, I just wanted to kind of go over the overall project schedule or the process itself to kind of give you an idea of how this all works together. So right now we're at the beginning stage of the project. We started about a month and a half or so ago or 2 months ago with the city staff, just to kind of kick things off, go through a project charter and the public participation plan. Both of those are available on the city's project webpage if you wanted to see those. It's basically kind of guiding on how we're going to go through the project and then also involve the public. We obviously created the stakeholder committee, or Dennis and CAC chose you folks to participate, and so that's where we're at in that first part. Our staff currently is working on the housing needs assessment, and so the next meeting, that when we come and meet with you, we'll be reviewing what the data says, and then have a good conversation about what the findings were, and maybe start thinking about what is it that the city will really need based on what we have. And then as we go transition into the next phase, which is going to be working over the holiday season and into the winter months, we'll be drafting a draft housing action plan along with the city, and that will be available towards the latter part of the winter and into the spring. And we anticipate the stakeholder group to have a final meeting to provide feedback and discussion on that draft plan before we take a final or develop a final housing action plan, which will then go to a public hearing, review, and adoption by the City Council in Oak Harbor. So again, as I just mentioned, the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, we're anticipating a total of 3 meetings during the project. So obviously today is what we're considering the project kickoff, just kind of going over the generalities of the project and then having a beginning group discussion. We'll, on the second meeting, which we're anticipating in the next couple of months or so, review the housing needs assessment itself. So we'll be developing a number of slides, presentation for you to kind of go over what all the data that we have found throughout the city, and then we'll discuss that. And then finally, the review of the draft housing action plan. And so here is a general schedule that we've put together along with Dennis and CAC on how we foresee this project going into 21. So the red arrows kind of indicate your participation. So we're at that July-August point at the kickoff. The housing needs assessment, we're anticipating completing that by the end of September. And we'll then meet with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. We'll definitely give you guys advanced notice once the city staff and us at LDC feel comfortable that we're ready to present that next phase. And then again, that preliminary housing draft will be developed after the housing needs assessment and the chance to speak with you all. And we'll take the latter part of the fall, through the fall and into the early winter months. And we're anticipating probably a late January, February-ish meeting to discuss that draft housing action plan. And that's when we'll conclude with the stakeholder committee, and then we'll kind of leave it open for general public comments as we move into the springtime. And then the final adoption is required to happen by the end of May. The deadline is in June, but we're hopefully going to target the city council to get it on their schedule no later than kind of the end or very latest the beginning of June, just so we have enough time to get all the documents in order and sent to the state, because the Department of Commerce is the ones that are kind of overseeing the entire project on the city's grant process. So we have milestones that we have to achieve, and so Dennis provides a report every so often on where we're at, and we just want to make sure that we're meeting all those deadlines as we move forward. So hence the reason for the pretty stringent timeline here. So I kind of mentioned this at the beginning just briefly, but kind of wanted to go over the roles kind of in a broader sense of what the stakeholder committee is about. So this one is the HB 1923 Housing Action Plan state guidelines. There's a number of those that are listed on their website that are part of the overall package for what a housing action plan should do. And one of which is what's highlighted and circled here, which is provide participation and input from community members, community groups, local builders, realtors, nonprofit housing advocates, and local religious groups. And so Dennis has done a pretty good job here on getting a cross section of Oak Harbor's community, and we're just really excited that you guys are part of that. So again, I just stated the first bullet, just cross section of Oak Harbor. Our goal is to identify existing challenges and barriers to providing the various types of mix of housing, and then kind of helping us understand the local context too. As an outsider, LDC, we're in the metropolitan area, and we don't always understand, kind of what's going on in the outskirts of the communities. But it sounds like, from what I've been hearing, is there's very similar challenges and issues that you folks are dealing with, even on Whidbey Island. And so being able to get your feedback is going to be very important for the city, as well as my staff, as we collaborate to develop these policies or things that will inform the policy decision makers. And then assisting the project team to consider the various housing issues and approaches, addressing the housing needs and potential policy recommendations, and then finally reviewing and providing comments on both the housing needs assessment and the housing action plan, which is going to be the next couple of phases. So we'll go into the housing action plan and needs assessment. So there's the needs assessment, housing action plan, and then lastly, the key findings and recommendations. So like I mentioned earlier briefly, this is the housing needs assessment, just under the GMA. It's an inventory of existing and projected housing needs, and that forms the housing element of a city comp plan. So this is the part that we're currently embarking on, and will be the next phase that we bring to you. Data requirements for the HNA. The Department of Commerce requires that the data fall into three main categories. That's a community profile, workforce profile, and a housing inventory. And with that kind of feeds into this gap analysis and land capacity analysis, which is really critical to finding out where are those deficiencies and needs in the particular community, in this case Oak Harbor, that we're dealing with. And then again, to recap on the housing action plan, the goal of the housing action plan is to develop clear, actionable strategies that meet the current and projected housing needs of Oak Harbor. State law requires that the Housing Action Plan identifies the strategies to encourage construction of affordable and market rate housing, allowing for a greater variety of housing types and at prices that are hopefully accessible to a greater variety of incomes. And I know there's a myriad of issues on why things aren't affordable, from land costs to infrastructure to locale. There's just a number of them, and I know all of you will have comments on that. It'll outline on how the city of Oak Harbor will respond to the community's unique housing needs. So like I said earlier, every community, whether you're in the mainland over here or if you're on Whidbey Island, and even Whidbey Island probably has their own micro housing conditions, whether you're on the northern part of the island or down towards Langley or the southern parts. There's always unique concerns and issues. And then finally, this will be a comprehensive tool that will help the city implement housing policies, programs, and strategies. And one thing that we always like to stress as part of this project is that we're not making specific policy decisions. And that will be important to note as we go to the city councils, that this is really kind of a guidebook that will hopefully inform decision makers on what needs to happen. So that's really what the ultimate goal is for the Housing Action Plan, is to provide the tools and the information, and then we can move forward, or the city council can then move forward with making those necessary policy changes that will be either in code or a comprehensive plan. So again, just to go over the goals: assess the housing needs, go through a comprehensive public engagement process by addressing the housing needs of the citizen of Oak Harbor, and then we'll prepare the HAP that's consistent with the housing element of the city's comp plan and addresses goals and policies. And then I won't belabor these again, but you know, the HAP really is the fact finding, and not the HAP, but this is the actual coming up with recommendations to help improve and address the housing needs based on what we find in the housing assessment data. So continuing on the process, we'll gather that HNA data, and that will prioritize community housing needs. We'll identify collaborative efforts and partnerships with local and regional housing providers. And then this will help inform and support the decision makers to address housing challenges in Oak Harbor. So at the beginning, I kind of briefly mentioned the city's public participation plan. And we have the city's created, or on their page, they've noted the Housing Action Plan project page, and this is the cover page of that. We're using a system called Conveo, which is a more user-friendly engagement document editing kind of a platform. And when you upload documents, you'll be able to actively provide comments and feedback directly onto those documents. So unlike a PDF form or Word or something like that, where you wouldn't really have that ability to do that, this is kind of in real time able to comment on things that are going to be uploaded on there. So you can take a look. Feel free to check that out. It's on the city's website. Dennis, you could either remind the group after the call on where to find that, and then they can kind of take a look at some of the information that's preliminary information that's provided. But as we go on, we will be providing the documents, as well as kind of the meetings, the meeting notes that we've done here, as well as any other pertinent information, public noticing, things like that. So that concludes the beginning portion of the meeting here, which is the presentation. And so I just left this slide up here. If you have any questions, most of you probably have all Dennis's phone number by heart, or at least his email. So at this time, I'll kind of leave the floor open if you wanted to talk about anything in the presentation itself. And then after that, we can certainly take a 10-minute break, and then we'll reconvene, and then we have a list of 3 questions that we'd like to pose to the group, and that will hopefully lead into some good discussion. So anybody have any questions, concerns, comments, anything about what I've gone over? Thanks.
Yeah, this is Jessica. I'm just curious real quick, is this slide available to us after this presentation so I can share with my staff?
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, and we can certainly send that to you directly, or we'll get it uploaded onto the project website, whatever works.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hey, Todd, I'm kind of a out loud processor here, and I just want to make sure that I understand your guys' role within this. Your guys' role is to basically collect all of this data and information for the city, make it then in a presentable fashion, and provide it to Dennis and then City Council, and as it goes up the chain. Is that a correct perspective in a very high level?
High level,
way?
yeah, correct. So,
okay.
so the phases basically are fact finding, data finding. What are the current ground conditions out there? That really kind of says this is where we're at. So you have a whole set of required information as well as optional information. And in fact, just earlier this week, we were sharing a cheat sheet of that's part of the guidelines, the Commerce guidelines of what's required as part of a housing needs assessment. In fact, that's probably something I could certainly share with all of you, or Dennis can. It really talks about those things that are required and those things that are optional. And that'll be something that we're, as LDC and staff will discuss, that will be the most beneficial to inform the city of Oak Harbor as they go forward. Obviously, we're going to have to do the required ones, but there may be a few of those optional ones that are going to be beneficial or unique to Oak Harbor that would help guide the Housing Action Plan document.
And with the data collection, what does that look like? Where do you start finding how many people want to live in Oak Harbor? I mean, that's I know that it exists, but can you explain some of that world?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just various databases, and I mean, frankly, a lot of it's census, and there's some regional sources of information. The state has some information as well. OFM, Office of Financial Management, does a lot of the information gathering for the state, cities, counties. Every state typically has an office like that is kind of a compendium of source data for jurisdictions. But there's different ways we can get information. One of the ways we're collaborators that we're working with too, and that's really important, who hasn't joined us today, but Brian from NAS Whidbey. We wanted to make sure that we had somebody from the base that is part of this group, and they play a very key role in how housing fluctuates from year to year, and the affordability and where people are living and things like that. So that's going to be a unique data set that we'll be looking at. That's unlike probably most communities. Most communities don't have a military base right in town. So you guys are certainly unique in that fashion, that it's literally at your doorstep, and you've got thousands of people that are working there and commuting every day. Or not, maybe they're working at home now, but in normal fashion, people are probably commuting to and from different parts of the island or into Skagit County. So those will be things that we'll be kind of looking at. And you can pick up commute data and stuff like that. So yeah, it'll be, hopefully you find it enlightening, when we come up with that data. But we'll our goal is to present it in a presentable and hopefully visually appealing format where we're exploring different options on how to present that rather than kind of a dry, narrative with a couple of graphics. Because I know after a while you look at so much of that stuff and you kind of like start to fall asleep. So that's not what we're trying to achieve. We want to make sure that this is really useful information. It's able to be digested really easily, and then you can start making some clear distinctions and conclusions about really what's happening in the community, and we'll say, wow, I really didn't know that's the case in Oak Harbor. Maybe you already have an idea, but maybe we'll find something totally different that we don't know about. So I think that's really going to be the fun part of this project, is the housing needs assessment and really seeing what's out there.
Todd, if I can take this opportunity, I noticed CAC is on board. I'd just like to introduce to the group the interim development services director for the city. He's obviously a key player as part of the city team is concerned. So, CAC, do you want to say hi?
Yes, thanks, Dennis, for noticing, and my apologies. I was having some technical difficulties and eventually was able to get in. I don't have video currently. That's still in works, but I am glad to be here in voice. Glad to see a lot of people attend, and I'm looking forward to this project. This has been, housing is generally an issue around the Puget Sound. All the communities are facing similar issues. As we go into more of this pandemic wave, there are a lot of unknowns in terms of housing, employment, economy, and a lot more challenges coming our way. So this will be really interesting as we get into our second stakeholder meeting and third stakeholder meeting. Just in the current situation where we are and looking forth into the future, as Todd mentioned, the data is going to be interesting. It's going to show us some historical trends. We'll try and get some real-time data to see what the pandemic is actually doing to us, and then see if any of that data makes sense moving forward in terms of our decisions or adaptations to housing. So thanks, Dennis. Again, CAC Interim Director, and I'm looking forward to some of the questions that Todd has for you guys, the 3 questions, and hearing about all your viewpoints and perspectives on housing in Oak Harbor. So thanks, Dennis. Appreciate it.
Great. So if nobody has any kind of comments on the presentation, since we're at the top of the hour here, I'll entertain a short 10-minute break so everybody can kind of stretch, and we'll reconvene here in about 10 minutes. So we'll say 4:10, and then we'll get started on the group discussion. And when we do the group discussion, I'll have the questions on the screen. But as I mentioned to Dennis earlier before we got started, I can queue up a map of Oak Harbor if we're interested in zooming in on a particular area, and I can certainly do that just to provide some context. I think that would be helpful. So in any case, enjoy your break. We'll be back here in 10 minutes. Thanks.
Todd, this is Matt. I am here.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I'm here as well, Todd, so present.
And we'll give everybody a minute or two, and then we'll move along.
Sounds good.
Well, my clock says 4:11, so we'll go ahead and get started. And hope everybody had a good stretch and able to get a drink. The next part of the meeting here today is we wanted to give an opportunity for everyone to address a number of questions that we have. These are 3 questions that the city staff and LDC chose the other day. I initially had a number of questions that were going to be shown, but then just for the sake of brevity and not confusing everybody, we just picked 3 questions. These aren't scientifically chosen or anything, but it's just really to kind of break the ice and really start having an organic discussion about issues in Oak Harbor. So with that, the first one that we'd like for you guys to discuss, and Dennis or Kat, please chime in too after I'm done, is what do you think about the current housing situation in Oak Harbor? And we realize this is a really broad question, but think about it in terms of your perspective and how you deal with it, either personally or professionally. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the potential upsides that could happen? So just interested to kind of hear your feedback about this particular question. So I'll step back and kind of take a listen. And don't
Thanks,
all
Todd. Yeah, let me just from a city perspective, this is Kat again. What we'd like to hear is just we hear a lot about housing as a city staff. We hear it from city council. We hear it on the news. There are so many perceptions of what the housing situation is in Oak Harbor, and they are varied depending on the source. And so we just want to hear your thoughts. Nothing too fancy or anything. Just, I mean, what do you think about housing? Do you think there's enough available? Do you think there's quality housing? Do you think there's variety of housing? Are they placed appropriately? What do you feel when you come into Oak Harbor? What is the sense? Just anything related to housing. Just share your thoughts, and then we can kind of get an idea of the different perspectives on the housing situation.
Just from yeah, go ahead.
Oren, Habitat for Humanity. I feel there's not enough diversity, so we're struggling. Like I live in a house that was built in the 60s. If I wanted to upgrade to that next level, I don't feel there's enough of those types of houses available, and then just the lack of buildable land, I think, is a major issue as well. But to me, it's just the broad spectrum of the price ranges just aren't available. You know, if I wanted to upgrade, that would maybe consider my home a starter home, which I don't think there's enough of those available. So I think hopefully that's enough to maybe get the ball rolling. But that's my perspective. It's a big question. It really is.
Yes, it is. And if I may, just to kind of encourage discussion, you brought up a really good point, you know, in terms of upgrading houses and having a wide variety of housing for people to choose from if they want to upgrade, downgrade, you know, sideways, however you want to have. It's a choice of housing, right? So you bring up a very good point. In your mind, what do you think are, you know, if you were to say, okay, there's two categories of housing. There's, you know, this, and then there's this big gap, and then you have these, you know, McMansions or $500,000, or there's no gap. So if you were to categorize housing, just in your mind, nothing scientific, from your perspective, do you think there's like 2 categories, 3 categories of price ranges in Oak Harbor to choose from, and not enough variety?
Yeah, I don't know, maybe 3 categories. Yeah, when you're looking at, and you said not to get scientific, but I think some simple data is the area median income and the variety of people that kind of fit into maybe the 90 to 150% of the area median income. I don't believe there's a housing market for those groups of people. You know, Habitat serves, you know, 80% and below, which is, you know, that's our niche, but that 80 to 150, you know, to where we want to keep that 30% budget on housing, that I think we all can acknowledge is a great budget to stick within. I think that's the missing element on a big scale. I mean, you can find one-offs here or there, but even to build that as a private general contractor, if I was to go after and target those families that want to build those houses, I'm not sure I could find an affordable chunk of property to do that on.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, you bring up a very good point. You know, the median income, and then you calculate the 30% of that, and then that makes the affordable housing factor, and then you take their mortgage and house payments, and then you say, okay, what for that income level, what can they afford? And is that where you're categorizing the 80 to 150,000 kind of a price range of homes? Is that a fair statement?
I think the 80 to 150% of the area median income. So I think the area median income, I haven't looked lately, but it's right around 75,000 in Island County, according to HUD. And you know, so if you break that down into percentages and do the math, you know, are you able to find a quality home for that probably 250 to 280, 250 to $280,000 area, which you know, one would hope you can find a nice home to raise a family with maybe a little breathing room in your yard, that sort of thing.
And one of my like just visceral reactions to the 250 280 range is, of course, I have people coming to me all the time saying, hey, I want to purchase my first home. They don't want a condo because everybody has a dog and a kid and et cetera, and they say, I'm approved up to 300,000, which they're really proud of, and I'm saying that's laughable because there is nothing, virtually nothing. Of course, you'll have a one-off here and there that is that price range. So I like, in our planning commission meeting, we did that survey with the, if you had a magic wand and you could wave it and I could create, I would say 2 categories of housing. The first would be almost like what we have in our northeast section of town. I mean, those are the little starter, they're all 1950s, 60s houses. They're maybe only 1,000 square feet. Some of them have done their garage conversions to be, 1,500 square feet. I do think modernization of having that second bathroom, but that would be that category. Is that anybody's dream home of only 1,200 square feet? You're hoping for a second bathroom. No, that's probably not a dream home, but it is a great starter home. And if you have some sort of yard, you feel like you can at least let your dog out, that would be category 1 if I could wave a magic wand. Now, those lots on the northeast section of town are amazingly huge, and I'm not sure that's truly necessary, but of course everybody loves it. And then category 2 would probably be the next step up of, your square footage is probably just under 2,000. You maybe have the extra den space, the extra family living room. You have the full garage. And those are the 2 groups of people that I encounter all the time. And when I pull up what's on the MLS, there's just nothing. I'm not even joking. There's just nothing. And what people forget is we all call it a starter home, but those are actually, especially if they're 1 story, those are great downgrade homes as well. So that when those families want to move up into the McMansions because they're finally 50 and have some savings. But right now, none of our older demographics have anything to move down into because it's just too costly. So why move down? So I think those 2 categories of housing could really, if I had a magic wand, create some movement.
Can you guys hear me? This is Darren at Huseby Homes.
Yes, yeah. We can hear you.
Okay, so obviously I don't want to get too deep into numbers, but it's going to be, in the foreseeable future, it's going to be really hard to have a new construction house, small new construction house, for less than about $450. Rising costs of materials, legislation that doesn't help in our cause. We got a new energy code that's going to cost another 10 or 15,000 bucks per house coming our way here in February. But I guess to find something under 450 for instance next year's spring market is going to be very challenging for new construction, at least. So yeah, I don't know how you get down to the 300 level without some sort of subsidy or Habitat doing their deal.
And hey, Darren, can you just educate me? When you say, okay, rising cost of materials, of course I get what that is. But I hear this legislation thrown around, and I just don't know what that means as to how it increase your costs. So can you teach me?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I mean, there's enormous ways that we get impacted by legislation. Again, I just mentioned the energy code, for instance. So we're going to be updating our energy code in February. The added regulation is going to add 10 or 15,000 bucks for the extra amenities that the state wants to have in our houses. So there's one. Department of Ecology, stormwater treatment. When I started 20 years ago, storm ponds were probably a quarter of the size that they are now, and a lot less complex. And obviously, clean water, et cetera, is good, but it comes at a cost. So there's that issue. And just, I don't want to get too specific into city stuff, but road size, parking requirements, it all adds costs. And eventually, yeah, like I said, you end up kind of where I was talking. We're going to be, starter home's going to be $450, I think, this next spring, for a new construction house, which is sad. Really sad.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, Darren. I mean, the cost of just doing business just because of all the regulations, it just adds up over time. This is, it's happening all around the Puget Sound if communities are subjected to certain regulations. So we have a challenging situation for stormwater because the city has a NPDES permit, phase 2 permit, and then the county doesn't. So the requirements for stormwater is different in Island County than it is in the city, and that itself adds a layer of costs associated. So generally, with more restrictions, I would say there are more costs, so more requirements. I wouldn't say restrictions, more requirements adds costs to it. And from a state perspective, there's a lot of requirements in Washington State. It's just not Oak Harbor or Island County. Just as a statewide, we have substantially more requirements than maybe Idaho.
Oh, for sure. I'm not trying to single out Oak Harbor. I mean, obviously, I'm in Snohomish County as well. So, I mean, Snohomish County and Oak Harbor is where I build, and yeah, it's the same across the state. It's not. I did not mean to single out the city of Oak Harbor with that stuff, but you know, it's just over time. You know, we keep passing small legislation to keep increasing regulation, and it just adds up and gets more and more expensive. And you know, I could build. I mean, just to give you a small example, just material-wise. I used to be able to build a 2,000 square foot house. Actually, there's several in Oak Harbor actually before the recession. Cost me $100,000 to build. Sticks and bricks, there it is. Now that same house is $200,000. So that doesn't include any part of the development portion of that as well, which, you know, that's also doubled in cost. So I can tell you, as far as purchasing land itself, the cost increases that we've seen, we still haven't got to a point where I could pay a landowner what I could pay them in 2007. I can't pay them that today and sell the product at market prices. We haven't gotten back to that yet because of all the costs.
Understandable.
Well, Darren brought up a good point. This is Wayne. The energy code that's going into effect in February, the way it's written is causing all of the builders to have to put in extra insulation and do different things that they haven't had to do in the past. And just to give you an example, Ted Clifton, that has zero energy plans, Clifton View Homes, some of you probably know him. Ted went through the new energy code and looked at his zero energy plans, and some of the houses that he has built that absolutely end up with zero energy overall during the energy usage overall during the year, because they put energy back into the grid, won't even meet the requirements of the new energy code. So it's written in such a manner that it's going to cost, you know, and Darren's right, 15, and depending on size of house, as much as $30,000 more for that house. So no, we're fighting a losing battle with the state. If the state would just roll that back and let us continue to do what we're doing for a few years until we get out of this, it would make it a whole lot better.
Good points.
To me, the important thing to kind of piggyback on what Darren and Wayne were saying is what this equates to is losing a solid workforce and a younger generation on this island, and really a lot of communities in Washington, where you're not going to be able to have anybody that can afford to live here and work here. That's the end result of that. I mean, we see it in Langley currently. They want people to go there and be able to work, and they just can't find them. So that's the effect to what's happening. I mean, I don't know how we roll it back. I mean, the good work that SICPA does is and promoting that organization so we can continue to advocate for appropriate measures as we move forward. But nonetheless, they're coming, and how can we combat that? I don't have the answer, obviously, but I guess that's the effect of what's happening.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, and very good point. And I'm hoping that when we do our data analysis, we can find out. We're talking about, you know, starter homes, single family homes, and that's only one kind of housing that we have. And of course, we want to try and match that up with our demographics to see if we can meet the demand there for those starter homes or single family homes. But what about other types of housing, rental? I'm not talking necessarily condominiums, you know, apartment complexes. You know, how do they fit into this equation? And before we jump into that, maybe I have a question for Darren. Does size matter? Do you think there's a break? I mean, you're talking about 2,000 square feet homes. We're getting a lot of pressure from the city to consider tiny homes and other smaller forms of housing. Do you think does size matter basically, and is that a way to cut costs if permitted, so to speak?
So size definitely does matter when it comes to housing, but here's your issue, is that you're taking, so what it costs to build a 4,000 square foot house, say, and say a 1,500 square foot Rambler per square foot, there's actually a significant price difference between the two. Because the cheap square footage is all the open space, right? The living rooms, the bedrooms, that kind of thing. The expensive stuff is the bathrooms and the kitchens, foundations, the roof, all that kind of stuff. So when you cram all that stuff into a smaller house, you still have that expense. I mean, your mitigation fees are the same, whether it's a big house or a small house. Your development costs typically aren't that different either, whether you have a small house or a big house. So all those fixed big numbers really skew the smaller house. I just throw out some numbers for you. For instance, if I typically, where do I want to start with that? So the 4,000 square foot houses that I built recently, I'm right around $100 a square foot, ish. But then you go into like an 1,800 square foot or 1,700 square foot house, you're more like 120, 125 for a lesser quality house, just because you don't have that cheaper open space to offset those larger costs. And again, like I said, a lot of this comes back to your water and sewer permit, same price, small or big. And all those big numbers just really impact the smaller home. So it makes a difference, but it's not the difference you're looking for, I guess. I don't think. Any sense?
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if, does it equate in numbers, so if you have a piece of land and you would normally get X number of units for a certain square footage of house, but yeah, you got the costs associated with the kind of utility and foundation aspects of the house, but maybe you get more units out of it, and that way there's some kind of a formula that works in terms of numbers that way. So just curious, I'm just trying to.
Well, if you're talking, well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is why, there's, you can pay more for a raw piece of ground. You can pay more per unit. Well, you end up paying less per unit for slightly attached products or smaller single family home lots than you would say a bigger one. But I guess, where am I going to go with this? I think if the density is there, you're going to go and get as much density as you can. We have to. Does that make any sense? So yes. Given a choice, if you have a 5-acre piece, you're going to max it out. So you're going to try to get as much density as you possibly can. I'm not going to subdivide to get less density than what I could possibly get.
Gotcha.
So if I can get 20 units, I'm going to get 20 units. If I can only, I don't want to develop 15 if I can get 20.
Yeah. So along that line, I have another question. I mean, it's, are people buying what you build, or, along that same line of thinking, are they looking for a very specific type of housing? Oh, you can put 20 units in normally what you would do 10 lots, you would have a backyard, front yard, but your 20 unit development may not have, front yard, backyard. Is that really impacting the purchaser? Are they making different choices, or are they going with what they have or what they can get?
I would say that 8 months ago, it didn't make that much of a difference. But today, yeah, I've definitely, the private yard space is very, very sought after after COVID. So yeah, no, yard space is definitely very important now.
Gotcha, especially with the pandemic, huh?
Yeah. I mean, I had lots of zero lot line stuff we were doing, and it was no problem with very, very, very small yards. And yeah, that stuff's not very popular now.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that, and I think maybe that is one of our future questions that's coming on the road. So I won't go down there yet.
I think that's our third question. So
yeah, so we're starting to dig into that already. So, but about rental housing. I'm sorry, go ahead. Somebody had a comment.
I was just gonna.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, as rental, I mean, that is not my world, so this is all completely anecdotal. But you know, the biggest thing that I hear constantly is allowing for pets, and that I don't think that's something that the city can really control. But what it means is that, you know, again, your little northeast section of town, someone who bought that as their first home and now has it as an investment home, they, because they are more likely to be willing to deal with pets than within, say, a condo or a townhouse, the proportion of money that they can get for that home as an investment is much higher than when owning a condo. So the cash flow is incredible because people are that desperate and they're willing to pay to have their yard space once again. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it's just, again, we're going into an economy. It's everybody, we have to look at Oak Harbor's demographics. We're a little different. As Todd mentioned, we have NAS Whitby, fairly resilient workforce. So that's really helpful for Oak Harbor. So we'll have, and so they provide, you know, that assistance through that helps a lot of our housing. So we should look at that data to see, you know, how much of housing they can afford, or what's the type of housing that can cater to their needs. But then, you know, the service population, the low-income population that supports a lot of the other aspects of Oak Harbor is where I think the real key is in terms of housing, and where do we get to accommodate them. The people that are not affiliated with the Navy, but affiliated with other employers and things like that in Oak Harbor, they are the ones that I think we would have to find solutions for, or choices for them. And that's, I'm hoping that the data will show, you know, what section or how much of the, you know, percentage of the population that encompasses, and how much of the housing caters to them, where is the gap. That's kind of where I think will benefit a lot going through this process. But generally, how the rental market seems to be on the low side, but seems like all the indicators seem that rental could be on the upside, given our economy, given some things that are coming forward. As Darren mentioned, cost of housing is increasing, and our incomes are not increasing at that same level. So the affordability of those homes are kind of creating this gap. So we'll have to try and see what can we do to shorten that gap. So
I'm just
hey,
curious,
Cactus, Wayne.
What Amy brought up is brought to mind the Airbnb or the VRBO. Is that culture pretty strong there compared to, like, I know in South Whitby, for obvious reasons, because just the dynamic, you know, the closeness of being to Seattle, but is it the same kind of conditions up on the north end?
I mean, I'll speak to that. I think it's a growing sector. One of the main limiting factors is, of course, jet noise. No one wants to own, not no one, I mean, but as a generalization, no one wants to own their second home in a major flight noise, of which there is some significant beach property that has significant jet noise. And that's where we find the Airbnb then, for the short-term rental. Most of the time, it's people who want to own a second home and mitigate the cost by renting it out. There's a few who just do it as a straight-up investment and as a business moneymaker, but there's only so much waterfront, and there's only so much waterfront that's not in a flight path. But the other growing sector is legitimately, just in the last 2 months, I've had 5 clients from Seattle and California saying, hey, this is slightly pandemic related, but we can remote work, and we're tired of the crazy of the city. Let's go to Whidbey Island. And so strangely, we're seeing the high end pick up right now. Now, I think that's fairly pandemic related, but it still plays into the bigger picture of how much housing is available. If even the high end doesn't have housing available, okay, it's interesting.
Yeah, I'm just curious on the impacts it has on the overall housing inventory, because there are communities that I know, like I said, South Whidbey, Langley, or even friends over in Leavenworth that have that strong tourist or second home pull, Chelan or something like that, a lot of the inventory is just eaten up by second home buyers. Therefore, the people that live and work in the community have a really hard struggle on finding things. And so I was just curious on how that's affected Oak Harbor, if at all. Yeah.
And the cash that comes from Seattle or California, the locals can't compete with. You can't win an offer with financing, even if you're well qualified when you're competing against cash. Also, at that note, Coupeville has put a moratorium on not allowing future, within the town limits, not allowing future Airbnb. I'm not a general fan of that restriction, but it's something that they've done to try to mitigate all of Coupeville being owned by tourist attractions.
Yeah, understandably so. I think Wayne had a comment. Wayne.
Yes, I did. CAC, you asked about all kinds of housing. We've got a myriad of types of housing in Oak Harbor already. But do we have enough? I think in all the different areas, I think is what we need to be looking at. Because yes, we need entry-level housing. Yes, we need mid-range housing. Yes, we need high-range housing. And yes, we need rental units, because we'd like to provide housing for everybody, but nothing says everybody's going to be able to buy their own house. They may have to rent until they save the money and get to the point where they can buy a house. So we've got to meet that area too, and that would take care of some of the lower income and some of the very junior personnel that come to NAS Whidbey Island might be able to afford to rent a house out in town, instead of now some of them are having to leave their families with their parents or something like that until they can get settled in and get base housing. So that's been a problem for years.
Actually, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, no, we do. I think we do need, there are gaps in all kinds of housing, and that's what we're hoping that the data will kind of show us in terms of our gaps and how we can accommodate them. So that was a good discussion. I think Todd has the second question up on the screen.
Yeah, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but the second one is, where do you envision housing growth and change occurring over the next several years? So I'll open that to either staff to kind of put more context into that, or kind of leave it open.
Yeah, I can kind of offer some initial comments. Just looking at that slide that you do have on screen, what Todd has on screen there is the zoning map. And so all the colored properties on that map is inside the city. And they have designation for zoning. There is another green line you can see on the west side. It's a dotted line. That if Todd can point it out, yeah, he's showing the areas that doesn't have any designation, but those areas are within the city's UGA, urban growth area. So just to give a little history of how that came about, back in 1991, when Growth Management Act was adopted by Washington, they had for all the cities greater than 5,000 come up with a comprehensive plan and a city boundary and a UGA area that the city is planning on growing into, and that UGA should have the capacity for a 20-year growth. I think that's kind of what the criteria was. So back in 1995, I don't know what tools they had at that time, but they took this map and they drew some lines around Oak Harbor and submitted it to GMA. I can't say that it was a scientific process. However, That was what was put into the books and submitted to GMA. And since then, that's been the UGA for Oak Harbor. And amazingly, it has not been amended. So some history with that. We, about, I want to say 10 years ago, there was a push to change the boundary of the UGA. And there were some property owners that expressed interest in coming into the UGA. They submitted applications to the city. The city looked at all those applications and said, yeah, that sounds great. We'll take you into the UGA. They did that with a comprehensive plan amendment. And then they said, oh, by the way, Island County, we've amended the UGA. You may want to update your maps to reflect that these are the properties that have been added to the city's UGA. And at that time, the county took a look at it and said, that's our line to draw, so you can't change that without our permission or our action. And so they went on a separate action to try and tackle that, and eventually decided that that was not something that they wanted to change. And so that led to some court cases. One of the first, I think, in determining whether the UGA is a county line to draw or whether it's a city line to draw. And that court case established that it was the county's line to draw. So our growth, city's growth, and or change in UGA, I won't say the city's growth, the change in any of our urban growth boundary has to be done in cooperation with Island County. I think that's the premises under which, GMA was set up. And so any change that we consider to UGA will have to be done in cooperation with Island County. So that's kind of the current procedure. But anyway, those are the areas that are in the UGA. So we'd like to just hear from people. Just to give you an overall, to the north, we have NAS Whidbey. You can see some red sections there. Those are the accident potential zones. There are also some fine contour lines, that dotted black lines that establish the noise levels due to the flight patterns. These noise levels show actually have a direct relation to building codes. So if you are going to construct something in a higher noise zone, the requirements are different. So if you go to the north, as Darren mentioned, all of the, actually, most of the energy code requirements actually satisfy, I think, most of our noise level requirements. So most of the houses that are built can fit into any one of those categories. But that's for residential, but it also applies to commercial. And commercial buildings, they're bigger, and having to do insulation, sound insulation gets more expensive depending on where you're located. So that's another restriction that is in Oak Harbor. And so given that, hopefully I gave a kind of the framework for that. Given what you know, where do you think housing is appropriate? What are the ideas? And we're not talking only new housing. We're talking redevelopment. We're talking infill housing or any other ideas such as that.
Okay, this is Wayne. Out to the west there, CAC, where you were pointing out the dotted green line, that would be fine. But some of the white areas that you have up Oak Harbor Road and up Goldie Road are already zoned for commercial and different things like that. So those are pretty well set. Personally, I think the way the city's going to have to grow, since the 10-year ago thing that you talked about, a lot of that area that was requested to be annexed has been put into conservation futures, so you're never going to be able to build on that property. So I think the only way the city's going to be able to go is going to be south along the east side of Highway 20, and that would take it on down to probably Monroe Landing Road, somewhere in that area, that I would think is the way the city's going to grow once you get the infill done in the area where you can. That's just my thought.
Understandable, and good point. Just another thought, when again, another history information. Back in the early 2000s, I think the NAS Whidbey got on the closure list as one of the potential bases that could close or was considered for closing. And a lot of the people from city council members, Island County commissioners, a lot of them, they went to Washington, D.C., made a pitch, and eventually got the base out of the list. But that group of people at that time determined that we should not try and put ourselves in that position again, where the city or city factors may contribute towards some decisions whether the base gets closed or not. So a lot of policies and comprehensive plans were amended during that time to make sure that our encroachment to NAs would be as minimal, and that we limit our impacts on the base and so on. And the base has been very sensitive from their standpoint as well in terms of keeping the community involved in activities they do so that their impacts are less as well. So there's a mutual understanding there. But one of the things that the city did is the Northeast 16th Avenue, that crosses Highway 20, right as you enter Oak Harbor from the north. If you can imagine Northeast 16th going all the way across Oak Harbor, currently it just goes to Goldie Road, but there's actually some easement that continues onto Oak Harbor Road, and there are still further easements that can even take it up to Heller. So the city council at that time decided that we're not going to allow for any residential north of 16th Avenue extended. And so that's in the comprehensive plan. It's also in our city code. And so any new residential development north of 16th Avenue is restricted. And the city since then and the county has worked together to try and limit residential development to the north. So Wayne, you're correct. I just wanted to give that supporting information. The north is severely restricted for residential growth, but the west and the south, yes, there are some conservation easements, but there are properties available there as well to grow.
I agree. There are properties available. No question about that at all. To the west and to the south. And the base hit the closure list 1990, 91, 92 time frame. I was still in the Navy at that time, so I couldn't be very vocal about it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was off by a decade there, I guess.
Keck, one of my questions with that, always rumored base closure list thing is, I guess, this is an opinion question. From your guys' work with the city council, is that still something that's legitimately feared? Because Navy scuttlebutt says, dude, there's only 2 bases now that have the growlers. This isn't going anywhere. Is that still a real factor in current policy?
Absolutely. I think as a city, you want to think long term.
Right.
Growlers can come. The prowlers have different impacts. The growlers have different impact. Tomorrow will be a different plane. So things will keep changing. And so we can't go with the current demand that we have for these installations to continue to exist. What the city has done, I think, when they went to determine, okay, how do bases make the closure list, I think is one of the questions that they asked. And what does the Navy consider when they put this? And a lot of it came from citizen complaints and land use conflicts. So those are the bases that first get on the list. So if ever there was any spending cut and they said we need to close bases, okay, what are the criteria they would use? And you don't want to have at that time some kind of criteria that would put Oak Harbor in a disadvantaged position. So it is a long-term plan, and I'll give you an example of that. We have noise contours. The noise contours changed. The noise contours we have now was established when they first did the ACU study back in, I think, 1995 or maybe 2003, I think. I don't know which one. And the current planes have a different noise contour, and some of it is actually different. However, if you kept changing these noise contours consistently, every 7 or 10 years, then our land development decisions also get pretty inconsistent in terms of where we allow things. So we want to keep that line consistent, so you'd see less changes from a city perspective, and that kind of offers some predictability. You know, we can at least have some lines you can draw and say, okay, this is just, you know, kind of out of balance. Let's just plan outside of it.
Video record or voice recording of something about a bombshell news article.
Well, encroachment is one of the things that they look at. The Navy or the military looks at for any of the bases is encroachment. So the city of Oak Harbor has done a very good job in changing the lands up north to be more commercial and whatnot, so that we don't have residential up there, and we don't have the encroachment that we would possibly have with housing and whatnot up there, because that isn't compatible with the aircraft that we have. And like CAC said, the noise contour for the FA-18 or G, whatever it is, EA-18, and for the P-8 are totally different. So, you know, I think what the Navy has done is set out a place out there where they say, hey, you know, let's be good neighbors, and let's keep that area clear, and let's keep that area minimalized as far as number of people at one time, so that we can work together. That way we can keep this base open. But yes, being on the closure list is definitely an issue that comes up every so often, and Whidbey is not out of the forest yet.
So just to continue on the thoughts of that, so yeah, the north is fairly restricted. I hope that answers your question on the restrictions and the base closure. So any thoughts on infill housing? I mean, if you think of infill housing or redevelopment areas in Oak Harbor, any thoughts on that from folks on where that could potentially happen?
CAC, some of the large lots that you have over on the east side that Amy was talking about earlier, you know, if you could allow mother-in-law's places or small houses or something like that put in, and give them a size that's big enough that they could actually put a rental in there and it be income for the people that own the lot, the entire lot, it would probably make a big difference there, and infill could happen. I'm not sure how that would be accepted in the city of Oak Harbor, but that's what's been done in other jurisdictions. And, you know, they've been able to build a small house in their backyard, what is it, auxiliary dwelling unit, I think they call it. Some places allow up to 900 square feet, and some of them allow up to 1,000 to 1,200 square feet. So, you know, there's options there.
Yes, absolutely. And let me just kind of bring that information up, and Dennis, correct me if I'm wrong on this one. So the city allows actually accessory dwelling units in single-family lots. It's been in the books for quite some time. I want to say at least more than 15 years, because that's kind of how long I've been here, and I know that that was in the books when I got here. And amazingly enough, it's more relaxed than other jurisdictions in the area. The city of Oak Harbor does not have a size limitation on the size of accessory building units. There's some total square footage area that there's some requirements for floor area ratios, but there is no size limitation for an accessory dwelling unit. So it's one of the most relaxed accessory dwelling unit ordinances in this region, I want to say. A lot of jurisdictions struggle with accessory dwelling units. It has come up in Washington State as one of the solutions to increase housing density, and other communities are sort of struggling with that idea because it changes the character of the neighborhood, and you know, cities and counties are trying to limit those in specific ways or testing the waters. But Oak Harbor has had this in the books. But amazingly, I want to say in 15 years, I can count less than you know, in fingers in one hand in the number of applications we've had. So there was initially some restrictions saying, okay, you know, if you build the accessory dwelling unit, you have to go to the county and you have to put a restriction saying the owner has to be living in that house. And so we thought, well, that was a restriction, so let's take it out. So a few years ago, I think it went to the Planning Commission and said, let's take that restriction out. And so that restriction is out of the books, I think, right now. So you can build, you know, any person in Oak Harbor that has enough land in their backyard to build an accessory dwelling unit. Almost every house that has that space can do it. It's allowed right now. So we haven't seen those, and I'd like to hear from some of our builders if number one, they're aware of it, of the what are the challenges, and then I have another idea. Like when you build an accessory unit, it helps the current owner, current person that lives in the house with some extra income. But you have to have that extra income, right? Do we have the demographics? So if I have a house and it cost me, you know, $300,000 in mortgage to buy that house, and I'm barely making with my income, I'm making mortgage payments, but I do have a backyard. Now, if I want to build an accessory dwelling unit, I need an additional, and Darren can probably attest to this. Even if I were to build a 600 square feet or 700 square feet accessory dwelling unit with a bathroom, let's say, it's going to add up. It's not going to be 20 or 30,000. That's going to be in the 6 digits. So does an existing property owner have the finances to do it, even though they can? And then if they stretch themselves, can they get the rental income to meet that? And then let's say they want to sell it. Then that house is not a starter house anymore. That's a 2-unit lot. So now who is the population that you're catering to buy the house? So a lot of questions there, but good questions. So I'd like to hear some thoughts on that.
So, CAC, I do know this last legislative session, they did pass for municipalities of 10,000 in population or greater that all single residential family zoning does have to require allowable accessory dwelling units. And so that's exciting news. I think it's kind of a Band-Aid fix for making a quick addressing the point of some affordable housing. And although I think it's a positive direction, I don't think it is a comprehensive or a long-term fix. But from my assessment of Oak Harbor, because normally your infill housing is usually in your inner urban context, and I do see that there is a little bit of opportunity as I drive around Oak Harbor to see that there's opportunity for infill. I actually see notices posted, so I think that they are taking advantage of the opportunities to do infill in certain areas. So it's really something I think that Oak Harbor, like Heck said, had some really good ordinance set in place before legislation mandated it this last session. And I think that I do see the builder contractor community taking advantage of infill opportunity in the urban context of the inner city of Oak Harbor. So that is a positive direction. Going back to the whole UGA discussion, I sat quiet. It's something that CAC and I have had some preliminary discussion on. We're assessing another potential study that would incorporate NAS would be. That is, we do want to address it. We have to address it in accordance to GMA timelines, but I think it's necessary for us to start early and engage early and often before we start putting commitments on paper. So CAC and I are on the same page. I think we have a similar vision, but we also want to do it properly in accordance to the update timeline. So we are addressing that already within the first 6 months that I have been here.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Jessica. Jessica's right. We've had some recent opportunity to talk with the Navy, and we're looking for opportunities to do a study on the UGA with some help from the Navy. So, but that's still a little ways out. There's some money for it. As Jessica mentioned, we have it in our kind of a list of things to kind of keep an eye on and take the opportunity to do. thanks for bringing that up, Jessica. Appreciate it.
So CAC, I'm wondering if, I think ADUs are a great opportunity. It's obviously not gonna fix the problem, but I do think it's a good opportunity. But I'm wondering if the low impact development standards affect a lot of those options. I don't know if you can answer to that or not.
Dennis, do you have any thoughts on that? Just from a general statement, I think yes, low impact development. We still haven't had like a full-on project that could utilize the low impact development techniques prescribed by DOE. I think our soils for some of the recent developments have indicated that they could use some of the more traditional stormwater facilities. But for some of the smaller projects, we are finding out that there's some impacts, cost impacts with low impact developments. And for residential development, we're still figuring out how to make that best work.
Yeah,
I can speak to the LID thing real quick if you want.
Yes, absolutely, please.
So depending on, so the soils that at least the projects that I'm involved with in Oak Harbor, you don't have good soils for LID projects. But in places where you do, I know there's some sandy pockets out there that LID works fantastic. And it actually is, it can be more affordable to develop because you're not building a big pond and infrastructure and everything else. You're doing more filtration type of stuff. I can tell you that I've got one in Marysville, actually I just did. It was probably about $20,000 a lot less for development costs using LID techniques and infiltration rather than doing the traditional pond retaining and whatnot. So if you got the soils, it can be beneficial. But the front side of that though is, as the city knows, is there's a lot more work, testing, studying, and design work to put those type of systems to use and get them approved.
That's it.
But Darren, isn't it true that if you do use LID, in many instances you can get another dwelling on a development site if you do use LID rather than having that detention swale?
Yes and no. Not to pick on the code of the city of Oak Harbor, but it's hard to make density. You get your full density anyways with all the other restrictions that fall upon you. Open space, active open space, road standards, parking standards, et cetera, et cetera. If that makes any sense. But you definitely, it definitely saves some money if you can. But again, I don't know, based on the areas I've been in Oak Harbor, there really hasn't been any good soils for that stuff.
That makes sense.
All right. Any other thoughts on housing? Yeah, just a quick note. I think stormwater, as everybody understands, and the builders will tell us this, that it's becoming a big issue, and drainage districts will really determine again, where growth can happen or where it can happen at an effective cost level, because of all the drainage basins and the improvements that need to be in place in order to support development. So, infill development is a great way to do it. I think, as Jessica pointed, we do, just because of the pressure to develop with lots where there are services, there are people looking for lots within the city and trying to find ways to develop them instead of going out into the greenfield. Greenfield is becoming a little more challenging to do, and it should be, understandably. We have services here in Oak Harbor, whether it's water, sewer. We want to try and use that as best as we can. We do get these short plats and 4-lot and 6-lot subdivisions that are trying to make use of our existing land, and we have code that allows for a lot of this, a lot of flexibility to do that, whether it's private streets, narrower streets, and infrastructure. So we are constantly amending our code to try and accommodate infill development, and we do definitely get, we're getting, at least in the last year or two, more short plats that take into account these smaller lots and smaller homes.
Just as a,
I think another thing that we need to look at is just because there's an empty lot doesn't mean it's for sale. So you can't count that as a buildable lot. I'm sorry. And I think that's been the case in the past.
Yes, and that's a whole another part of, you know, what is developable and whether there's land available and so on. So yes, you bring up a very challenging point. There's a lot of land in Oak Harbor that is vacant, but is not available for development. So it adds to the challenge, and it's something sometimes it's hard for any jurisdiction or agency to control the outcomes of that.
as a thought on the ADU subject, on some of those larger lots, and my brain of course goes to that northeast section since the houses are smaller, I'd be curious on the data of, you know, it's awesome that the city legislation doesn't, and code doesn't, is very loose and is able for that, but I'd be curious about whether or not the financial ability of the average person who owns those lots, do they actually have the financial ability to, you know, I'm just throwing out a number, I don't know, 50,000 to create a little 700 square foot, 1,000 square foot ADU. I'm just not sure the population actually has that kind of money, and, you know, possibly there's lending options from the equity in their house, et cetera, but I think that that normal demographic probably doesn't even consider those options, because to them 50,000 is astronomical.
Okay. Well, we got one more question for you all before we wrap up. And this one we sort of just touched on it, but we wanted to have a little bit more of an in-depth discussion if possible. So what effects do you think that the COVID pandemic and its effects might have on housing in Oak Harbor in the years to come? Jack, if you have any intro comments on this.
Yeah, I'll start us off again, and thank you. That was also something that I brought up, a very interesting point in terms of, you know, the need for open space. You know, I remember when the pandemic started, especially in New York City, when there was all kinds of mandates to say, okay, you need to maintain 6-foot distance and so on. People were getting out of their apartments and on into the street, and, you know, the park, Central Park, was becoming really packed and so on. And in my mind, I was thinking, what is this doing for density? You know, this pandemic seems to be impacting highly dense areas, and I wonder what impact it would have on the long-term psyche of just of humans. We are very sensitive to these factors. We like to not be subjected to these things very often if we can. And so we tend to make decisions and adaptations that hopefully prevents us from putting ourselves into these type of situations very often. And so I think our choices will be different, I think, as people, as humans, as we go into future housing. And again, the pandemic is still out there, right? It's going to still cause more and more adaptations, so force us to think of things differently. And I think, as Darren mentioned, we're all already maybe seeing a little bit of that in terms of housing choices. You know, I want more space. I want to have that distance. I don't want to be in a crowded place. So that's one of the ideas, or one of the things that we think about. But so along those lines, do you think that the pandemic, and even in terms of availability of materials, there was some conversation early on about the cost of the supply chain. The pandemic is not impacting just the U.S., it's impacting the entire world. And so there's a lot of demand for materials around the world differently. Supply chains are choking up, and maybe we'll be forced to adapt in different ways. So this is kind of a futuristic question, I think, and we have a good group of people around. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on how do you think some of these small things maybe could impact our housing choices in the future?
Well, I think you're going to have people wanting to have a little bit more open space and at least have a yard that they can go to for a number of years until they get used to the idea of the pandemic is over. You know, once it is over, and I think that's going to be a few years down the road. But until then, CAC, I think we're going to be looking at people wanting a small yard at least that they can be pretty well secluded with their own family.
I agree. Yeah, that's generally, I mean, I think, I mean, if we think of this personally, you know, okay, I'm going to buy a house. What am I going to look for? If I'm going to look for a house in the next 2 years, those are things that are definitely going to be on my mind as I think through that. What about materials? Building industry feeling any pinches there, and do you think that will change how we do construction or the way we do them?
Well, the building industry is seeing an increase in cost of things, just like they did in 2008, 2009 during that time frame. And I think what's going to happen once the mills and everything are back up on operating worldwide like they have been, we might see a reduction in the cost, but right now we're seeing an increase in the cost of just about everything that has to do with building a house, and that's driving the price up exponentially.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, and I'm just going to throw something out. I'll wait a little bit with my thoughts. Somebody else had a comment.
Oh, I was just going to chime in. Obviously, in the middle of this thing, but my lumber costs in the last 60 days have almost doubled. You know, a $20,000 lumber package is now almost $40,000, and it's the relief will probably come somewhere in November, December, would be my guess, before you start seeing us get caught up. But we're getting put on allocations, furnaces, lumber, roofing. Heck, try to go buy a refrigerator or freezer these days. Those things are actually starting to get kind of tough. You know, you're seeing some contractors stock up on materials just so they can keep their jobs and keep their businesses going. Kind of reminds me of the toilet paper issue we were having back in February. Everybody's stocking up, inventories are way down, it's hard to find stuff, and eventually, like Wayne said, we'll get caught back up and prices will probably soften somewhat. But the difference now is that, you know, in 2007 and 8, I mean, it was just the massive amount of houses we were putting together for building supplies. That was actually causing. This time it's truly is supply. You know, the 45-day, 60-day shutdown of all these mills and everything is finally, it's coming home to roost here at this point. So it's definitely going to be a challenge for the next couple, 4 to 6 months. Just to keep things going.
And Darren, you're saying exactly what Youngman Construction is saying, what Cascade Custom Homes, what Piazza Construction over here in Skagit County is saying. All of our builders are saying exactly the same thing. They're seeing the price of their materials go way up, and that in itself is not good for the price of housing if we're going to try to fill a void.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point, since we have builders. I mean, you know, it kind of puts some the trajectories at a disadvantage. So if you're continuing to build a house and trying to accomplish your project in the next 6 months, you're actually at a disadvantage because you're spending more on materials. The cost of the housing is going to be generally higher because of the money that went into it. And then if you think about it, 6 months from now, when the supply gets back up again and the prices drop, you feel like you're going to be upside down a little bit, in the sense that you've spent the higher amount of money into the house, and then the prices are going down, and you won't be able to get necessarily what you put in. Is that a fear?
For me, for sure, absolutely. It's just the market's so strong right now. Is the only thing that's saving grace. But I'm not releasing houses very early anymore, so I can get the prices adjusted to where I think I can keep my margins similar to what they were pre-pandemic. But yeah, the builder is definitely getting squeezed. I mean, obviously everything that I'm developing and building on right now, I bought 2-3 years ago. So it, you know, I'm already stuck, and you can't wait. Interest clock, overhead, et cetera, et cetera. That's all clocks that are clicking over your head. You can't stop. You just can't.
Even though it makes sense to stop, you can't.
You pretty much, you know, you got guys, you got your guys are employed, so you know you don't want to lay people off and try to get them back again. So it's just, yeah, you just got to keep moving.
Yeah. Well, it's tough, and what's bad, like Darren, for example, is building houses now with the higher cost materials. So those are going to have to go at a higher cost. And a few months from now, when the cost of those materials come down and he builds the same house again, how can he put that house on the market for less than what he sold the other one and still maintain a value in that type of house? See, that's where the market is not working.
Yes, I agree. I mean, that's kind of just timing, right? I mean, it's hard to kind of plan for that. As Darren says, it's like you can't slow down sometimes, even though it makes sense to catch up. And so those are some of the drawbacks that we face 6 months, 8 months from now, when we're still wondering, you know, if the supply is back up and everything is reasonably priced, why is housing still so expensive? You know, the question will come up, and for the people in the business, they know why, but for people buying the homes, they won't. And so that will be a very difficult thing to explain and to understand.
Another factor into this, both short-term and I believe long-term, will be the mortgage interest rates are actually fantastic, which is great in one sense, but where you would normally think that the buyers have more buying power, all the other factors that you guys have been talking about has meant that they don't have buyer power, but the demand is strangely still there. Like there's this pent up, we can take advantage of great interest rates, and maybe we can buy a house, but the supply just hasn't kept up. And I do think pandemic related, of course, none of us have a crystal ball on, but there's talk of a coming recession. Okay, that's neither here nor there, but that most likely means that interest rates will remain low, meaning most likely that the demand will still be there on a significant level, at least, for housing, because interest rates are still low, but there still might not be the supply there. So
yeah, and we'll have to, and good point, the interest rates definitely impact, you know, people's buying power. And I wonder how many people, from a general housing availability, like, I mean, during the pandemic, I don't know if people are willing to sell, if people are willing to move, right? I mean, there's not a lot of supportive facilities to facilitate a move during this pandemic. So even if people want to sell home or they want to go somewhere, they just feel like maybe this is not the right time to do it.
And especially in our Navy town, because for the last 6 months, the Navy has not allowed PCSing to other locations. Now, there's been a few exceptions that have been made, but they have to go through their chains of command to get those exceptions. We're just starting to see those PCS moves being allowed again on an exception basis, but kind of a broader exception basis.
Gotcha. Yeah, very. Go ahead. Somebody had a comment.
Oh yeah, no, I was just giving a heads up on the time check. So we're down to 7 minutes till 5:30. So just wanted to respect, you know, time, and we have just some closing comments too.
Absolutely. I will keep quiet, and we'll hear from any others that have thoughts. Good thoughts and good points.
I think we beat this thing to death today anyway, and we've got a whole lot of things to talk about and think about for the next few days. And I look forward to getting the other information sent to me or whatever, so that I can look at it and have input ready for the next meeting.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So that leads into our next or last slide here, and what we're calling next steps. So we're looking to complete, again, the housing needs assessment within the next couple of months. And our goal is to send that out to the city first for their review, and then we'll get that to you folks in advance of the meeting. At least a couple of weeks is probably what we'd like to do. And then we'll meet and then kind of talk about that at the meeting. So we'll put up some key slides and things that we think will be probably germane to a good discussion, or at least the critical ones. But we'll obviously leave it up for open discussion like we did today. And then we're going to continue to have public outreach information put up on the project website, like I mentioned. So we can, what we'll do for this one is we'll get Sammy took some notes here. We'll make sure that the city staff has a chance to look at that, and then we'll get that sent out. And then we'll also put that on the project page, and the recording of the meeting today will be on the project page. And then once we get closer to October, we'll figure out a date and time that works out best. This seems to be a pretty good time for most people, but we understand that there's a lot of people that are gone just on vacation. So hopefully in October we might get a few more people, but that's okay. We had a great discussion. I really appreciate all the input that you guys gave. It's very insightful. I've learned a lot, and we're just really looking forward to the next couple of meetings with you all. So Dennis or CAC, if you have any closing comments, that's all I had for today.
Thanks, Todd, and thanks everybody. I thought like Todd, I thought the discussion was very good. We shared some interesting information. I look forward to the next meeting. I'm hoping we have some good data to share with you guys, and then we'll also be 3 months in. And I like our discussion on some of our futuristic ideas of what we think could happen. And it'll be good to revisit some of those thoughts in October to see where we are in the pandemic, where we are in the housing. Things are changing, and we have good people here that have kind of insight and a pulse on some of the development-related environments. So I'm looking forward to hearing from everybody in a couple of months. And combined with our data, I think we'll have a better understanding of what's going on in Oak Harbor, and with our collective futuristic thoughts, maybe we can kind of design a path forward that I think could work. So thank you everybody for your time and your input this afternoon. Appreciate it.
Thanks again. Everybody stay safe and enjoy the rest of your summer. We'll see you guys again soon.
See you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.